Hello everyone and welcome to the first class of Principles of Kitchen Management. Good morning, my name is Chef Alan Watt. I've been teaching in Durham College since about 2015. I also teach sometimes in St Lawrence College. Probably by this time you'll realise that I'm Scottish, so I have a bit of an accent. And if you need to contact me for any reason, this is my email address. So first off today, let's have a quick look at the course outline that we're going to be learning over the next 6 weeks. Today we're going to be looking at the history of the kitchen, the history of restaurants, the history of the organisation of the kitchen, how it has evolved down through the last while, how it comes from a classical party system, what today's kitchens look like, that sort of thing. That's what we're going to be looking at today later on. Then Thursday we're going to be looking at human resources. We're going to look at the Employment Standards Act because we all need to know what our rights are as workers going forward. We'll then look at recipe conversion, how to make recipes bigger or smaller and get them accurate, how to figure out how to change a recipe from 120 8-ounce portions to 560 1-ounce portions, whatever it might be. But there's a way of doing that, so we're going to be learning that. We're going to be looking at butcher's and cook's yield over the next few weeks. Butcher's yield, where you take a piece of meat, half a cow, let's say, you pay $10 a kilo, you start to take the bones off, you have 10 kilos of bones that you've taken off, you're still paying $10 a kilo for those bones. We need to figure out how to make that $10 relevant, how you actually do that when you work your food cost out. And cook's yields are to do with taking a prepared piece of meat, for instance, roasting it in the oven, cooking it, what sort of loss do you get with shrinkage, with fat wastage, figuring out how many portions we can get out. There are formulas for that you can work out any size of piece of meat before you cook it, and you can figure out how many portions, whatever size you desire, that you can get out of that. So we'll be learning all of that. We'll be looking at purchasing and food cost control, how to make sure that you're making money. We'll look at production planning, how to figure out how to produce things in a timely manner, etc. And then we're going to look at kitchen design and kitchen equipment. And the next slide will look in detail about some of the assignments we have and how we assess what we've learned going forward. So hopefully you've already looked at the amended course outline, but I'll just go over some of the tests and assignments and quizzes that we're going to be doing, the weighting of those, and how important they are, you'll see by the weighting. So first of all, we're going to have test number 1, which will be next Tuesday. That's going to be in Human Resources and the Employment Standards Act, and it's worth 14%, so fairly big. Quiz number 1, we'll be looking at systems of measurement, recipe conversion, as purchase price, edible portion, all those kind of things. Some of them you'll already be touching on when you do menu planning, but this kind of is just a backup from that, I guess. Assignment number 1 and 2, I've combined them together. That's going to be yields and recipe conversions. So you're going to be doing a 3-course menu. You're going to figure out how many portions that makes by the recipe, etc. And then you're going to change it to 150 portions or whatever it might be. And that's worth 10% overall, 5% for each part. Then test number 2 is technically the midterm. That's going to be worth 16%. Test number 3 is going to be on butchers and cooks yields. It's going to be worth 12%. Assignment number 3 is going to be cost of goods sold. That's inventory management, basically. It's working out your food percentage, how you're going to make money, or what amount of money you're making, what food cost percentage you're making, how to adjust that if you need to. Assignment number 4 is on equipment and kitchen design. basically you're going to take a 3-course menu and you're going to figure out all of the equipment that you need to produce that. So chopping boards, knives, plates, bowls, whisks, all that sort of stuff. And you're going to actually go through it step by step, and you're going to figure out how to produce that and what equipment you're going to need. That's worth 10%. And then the final test, which is basically the final exam, that's going to be in 2 pieces. The first part is going to be an online quiz. The second part is going to be like a fillable PDF, which will have the math questions and such like on that. Nothing to worry about right now. But if you add everything up, you'll see that it comes to 100%. And this is the assessment that you're going to be, well, that's how you're going to be assessed as to whether you've passed or failed. So with all that being said, let's get to today's class and the content of today's class. First of all, we're going to talk about kitchen management. What exactly is kitchen management? Why is it important? How many restaurants actually fail? Why they fail? So it's a fairly, I think this is a really good course for those of you who want to run their own business eventually, or even just if you want to run your own kitchen eventually. You need to know these things. We're also going to look at the food history, why restaurants became into being in the first place, how they've evolved down through the time, what sort of different styles of food happen, the food trends that are in there, all that. We're also going to look at the Kitchen Brigade, why the Kitchen Brigade came into being at the beginning, how it was organized. It was a very brilliant thing at the beginning. How modern day kitchens have changed because they're smaller. There's not so much money to spend on people, etc., etc. And then we're going to look also about the qualities of a professional, because professionalism is really important. It's what's going to get you through the rest of your life in a culinary kitchen. Simple as that. So there's already some stuff posted online that are going to be a backup to this, some Word documents that are going to flesh out some of the things that we're going to talk about in this PowerPoint or movie as you're going to have right now. So what is kitchen management? So normally what I would do is I would throw this out to the class first of all. We'd come up with ideas and you know, people would say different things about what they think kitchen management is about. We obviously can't do that right now, but here's just a few things that you have to do as a kitchen manager, as an executive chef, as a chef owner, as a restaurateur. If you're running that business, these are the things that you need to do in order to manage your kitchen efficiently. You need to know how to purchase things properly. You need to know how to purchase things, receive things properly. If you're not looking after the food that comes in, everybody's out to rip you off. It's as simple as that. And if you're not weighing the products when they come in, if you're not making sure that they're fresh when they come in, then you're going to lose money very, very quickly. Talking of money, everything is all about a budget. You have to budget how much you've got to spend on a day-to-day, week-to-week, year-to-year basis, whatever. And you need to know how to control that, how to come in and budget. So kitchen management is about budgeting and making sure that you're not wasting and that you're making money. Also, kitchen management is about menu creation, recipe creation, standardized recipes, how you train your people, how you cost your menus, how you design a menu, etc., etc. That's what you have to do. I keep saying etc., etc., don't I? It sounds very posh, but I'm sure it's pretty annoying. I'll try and stop. Also, people management. When you're running a kitchen or you're a kitchen manager, you have to manage the people or the staff, if you like. You have to schedule. If there's any conflicts between one person and the other, you have to be able to make sure that those conflicts are resolved. Otherwise, they affect service, they affect the day-to-day mental picture of the people who are working in the kitchen. You have to think about injuries. What happens if someone cuts themselves? What happens if someone breaks their leg while they're working because they slipped on a wet floor? All of those things are the responsibility of the kitchen manager, the executive chef, And this is what this course is all about. It's basically pulling all these things together. And if you actually look at the assessments that we've already gone, or the course outline, you'll see that we're covering a lot of these things over the next few weeks. So in the early 1500s, in Paris particularly, tradesmen's guilds were formed. So first of all, there were tradesmen's guilds. So if you were a woodworker, you would join the carpenters guild, for instance, pretty much like a union, really. You might have a blacksmith's guild, you might have an ironworkers guild, all of those different things, a shoemaker. And if you wanted to buy a specific item, you would have to go to that guild in order to buy that specific item. Then they started to look at culinary guilds, and culinary guilds were formed exactly in the same way, but you would have a baker's guild. So if you wanted bread, you would go to the baker's guild. If you wanted pies, you would go to the pie maker's guild. Butcher's guild, all of those things. So they were joining together, like tradesmen joining together to monopolize, so that you would have to go there to buy. So if you wanted to buy a loaf of bread, you might have to go all the way over to the other side of Paris to buy your loaf of bread from the baker's guild. And then you wanted a pie, and you have to go all the way over to the other side of Paris to buy a pie from the pie maker's guild, which I just made up, but never mind. And then maybe you wanted to get some meat, so you would have to go all the way to another part of Paris to buy meat from the butcher's guild. So one specific form of food, all of these kind of guilds together, a whole bunch of guys together, so that they could monopolize, so that they could make money and force people to buy from them. So it was a really good idea at the very, very beginning. So if you can imagine, with all these guilds, if you wanted to make soup, for instance, you would have to travel all over Paris to get the ingredients to make your soup. You would have to, if you wanted chicken, you would have to go somewhere. If you wanted meat, you would have to go somewhere else. Vegetables, you'd have to go somewhere else. Bread to serve with your soup, you'd have to go somewhere else. And then in 1765, Monsieur Boulanger, he decided that he was going to open the first freestanding restaurant. So he would go to all of these guilds, get the ingredients, make what he called restorative broths, basically soups, and he would make those and then sell them. So basically the first restaurant came from that entrepreneurship. Costs him a lot more to be able to go and buy the stuff to make the things, but you can charge premium price, and people would go there and get completed soup without having to travel all over the place. So that's basically how the first restaurant was established, and it was in 1765. The 1800s, however, were a really important time for the development of restaurants and cuisine in general. It was called Le Grand Cuisine. We're going to look at a couple of the chefs or cooks who were really involved in beginning to develop recipes and this type of cuisine. But suffice it to say right now that in 1893, a gentleman called Charles Ranhofer, who had a restaurant in New York City called the Delmonico, he published his Franco-American Encyclopedia of Cooking. It was called The Epicurean. There was a lot of recipes in it, 3,500. But what I want to say at this point is, you'll notice it says Franco-American. So basically it was French cuisine, which was now developing into having an American style to it. So it was for both countries. I find that interesting, and perhaps you will too, because French cuisine didn't actually come from France. It happened when one of the kings of France married an Italian lady called Caterina de' Medici, and she brought all of the Italian recipes to France, and that's what eventually developed into French cuisine. So just an interesting point there, I think. Some of this stuff is actually fascinating once you look into the background and the history of it. So the first chef that we're actually going to look at is Marie-Antoine Carême. Carême was born in June 1784, and he died on January 12th, 1833. So early 18 or late 1700s to early 1800s. But the 1800s were really about the developing of 20th century cookery, if you like. He's the forefather of this Grand Cuisine style that you hear about. Very interesting man. And just as an addendum to this slide, by the way, I've posted an autobiography or a biography of Carême on DC Connect under content if you want to look into his lifestyle a little bit more thoroughly. So Marie-Antoine Carême was a founder and the architect of French haute cuisine, which is also known as Le Grand Cuisine. His story is ridiculous. It's like something out of a Charles Dickens novel. So we'll look at a few points in the next couple of slides. So Carême was one of at least 25 children, and he was out in the street at the age of 10, and he had to make his own way in the world. I guess luckily for the world, he knocked on the door of a restaurant and he got a job in there and he developed Le Grand Cuisine. But I mean, he could have knocked on the door of a shoemaker and become a cobbler. So we're kind of lucky in our trade that he decided that he was going to be a chef and work in a restaurant. So by the age of 21, if you fast forward to that point, he was chef de cuisine to a nobleman called Talleyrand. He also served over he's an amazing resume if you think about it. He served as head chef to the future George IV of England. He was chef to Emperor Alexander I of Russia and Baron James or Baron Rothschild. He wrote a lot of different cookery books. Hundreds of recipes and menus and the history of French cooking and instructions for organising kitchens. He was the very first person to start organising kitchens. As an addendum to this as well, I was lucky enough to be in the Culinary Institute in America for a while, learning there, and they have an amazing library there. The school is actually in an old monastery, and there's this round room which you go upstairs to get to, and that's the library, and there's some really, really old books in there, and I was actually lucky enough to be able to look at one of Marie-Antoine Carême's books there. It was pretty fascinating. So just a quick review or a quick synopsis of some of the things that Carême did in his life. He was known as the Cook of Kings and the King of Cooks. You probably heard that expression before. His stated goal was to achieve lightness, grace, order and perspicuity in the preparation and presentation of food. He was very famous for doing Roman columns out of food and buffet styles, buffet work that was quite ridiculously ornate. As a saucier, he standardized the use of a roux. He devised a system for classifying different sauces, which you probably already know. As a culinary professional, he designed kitchen tools and equipment and uniforms, double-breasted uniform, so that when you splash things on, you're not going to burn immediately because the uniforms are double-breasted. You probably know the history of the chef's uniform, but it is actually functional. Also, he was a garde-manger, and like I said already, he did these very elaborate buffets with what they call pièces montées, and these were showpieces that he would make from edible ingredients, if you like. As an author, as I said before, he wrote and illustrated some really important texts on the culinary arts. Quite a fascinating man, all in all. And remember, they're on DC Connect under content. I've posted a Word document which gives you a little bit more about the history of Marie-Antoine Carême and some of the things that he achieved if you're interested. It's not compulsory reading, by the way. So if you remember, Carême was the forefather of 20th century cookery, but the father of 20th century cookery, or the so-called father of 20th century cookery, was Georges Auguste Escoffier. You've probably heard of Escoffier. He lived from 1847 to 1935, did some amazing stuff. As we go through the next few slides, I'll tell you a little bit more about him, but also on DC Connect under content, I have posted another Word document with a little bit more about the life and times of Escoffier, some of the things that he achieved, his partnership with Cesar Ritz. You've probably heard of the Ritz Hotels. That's where that comes from. So let's kind of a dive in and look a little bit more thoroughly into Georges Auguste Escoffier. So a little bit more in-depth look at Georges Auguste Escoffier. Escoffier was called the Emperor of Chefs by Emperor William II of Germany, and he's widely known as the King of Chefs and the Chef of Kings. He modified, streamlined, codified the elaborate haute cuisine or grande cuisine created by Marie-Antoine Carême. He developed it much more thoroughly. He streamlined it much more thoroughly. He made it much less complicated. He organized kitchens in a pretty fascinating way. In fact, in such a way that kitchens are still organized in the same way that Escoffier developed. So Escoffier had a ridiculous resume. He was chef at the Carlton Hotel in London, the Grand National Hotel in Lucerne in Switzerland, the Grand Hotel in Monte Carlo, the Savoy in London, Ritz Hotels in Paris and New York City. With Cesar Ritz, who was his partner, they got together and they developed Ritz Hotels. One of the best restaurants outside of France was a dining room in London, Savoy Hotel. The hotel is obviously still there to this day. And I was actually lucky enough to be able to be in a kitchen in England, in Brighton in England actually, that Escoffier worked in. He developed and worked in this kitchen. And I was actually a few years ago, I was actually lucky enough to be able to visit that. But an extremely fascinating guy. So Escoffier is generally credited with refining the Grand Cuisine that Carême developed. He streamlined it, he made it much more efficient, he made it work, he divined all the sauces, all the mother sauces that you know about, the 5 mother sauces, all from Escoffier. And if you think about some of the things that you learn in labs today, it's called classical cuisine. So the Grand Cuisine of Carême developed into Escoffier's classic or classical cuisine. And all these recipes that we learn right now, the sauces and things that we learn, they're more than 200 years old. So they work because they've been developed, they've been scrutinized, and Escoffier was really the guy who started off the research into the refinement of that Grand Cuisine. He brought French cuisine basically into the 20th century, and he's most famous for developing the partie system. And we're going to look at that in detail because it's a really significant part of how kitchens are organized and what we must learn for the rest of this course. So just a quick overview of Escoffier and the things that he achieved in his life. He was the emperor of world kitchens. He defined French cuisine and dining during La Belle Époque. He simplified food preparation and dining. He organized things so that the flow was much better. And if you imagine, there was a time, particularly during Carême and the evolvement back from that, where there was no organization in the kitchen. So if an order came in for a specific dish, you would maybe find 2 guys were going to make that specific dish and they would clash with each other and all of that, where Escoffier said, okay, we'll break that dish down into who's going to do the work. So perhaps it was a veal escalope, it would be, the order would be given into the garde manger or the larder cook, The garde-manger would cut the veal, flatten it out and bread it. He would send it out to the saucier. The saucier would cook that dish, put the appropriate garnishes and sauces or whatever it might be on it, and serve that over the pass to the customer. So you see he streamlined the way that kitchens work. He wrote a whole bunch of books. One that's still in use today, and I actually have a copy in my library, is called Le Guide Culinaire, and all of those classical garnishes and recipes are actually in there, albeit that they're very elaborate. Cock's combs and all those type of things that you don't normally see too much being used in the kitchen these days, but pretty fascinating stuff. So now we're going to look a little bit more about the development of modern day cooking. We're going to look at some of the chefs involved in that over the next few years from the 1950s onwards. But one very important gentleman was a chef restaurateur called Fernand Point. He had a restaurant called Le Pyramide. Le Pyramide is still there today, or the Pyramid, if you like, is still there today. But he, more than anything else, developed what he called nouvelle cuisine. So he took classical cuisine, the classic cuisine of Escoffier, and he lightened it and refined that a little bit more. So it's development, it's evolution, if you like. The classical cuisine is becoming something more streamlined and more lighter. But more importantly, he was influential and trained some of the specific French chefs who really took his philosophy of nouvelle cuisine and developed it further. You probably heard of some of these chefs I'm going to talk about, but if you haven't, then it's worth just taking a few minutes to Google them, to look a little bit more about their background, their development, and who they are. Paul Bocuse, incredibly famous, probably the most famous modern day French chef. He just died recently, not that long ago, maybe a year ago. If even that. Jean and Pierre Turgot, very famous chefs with a restaurant in France again, and La Chapelle. These are guys who developed the nouvelle cuisine. An interesting fact, grand cuisine, or classical cuisine, it was all silver service, so everything was served on platters. So if you had a party of 4 in a restaurant and you ordered a chicken dish, the chicken would come out on a silver platter. So there would be 4 portions of chicken with the sauce, perhaps on a silver sauce boat, and the waiter would come out and with a spoon and fork would serve that to each person at the table and put the chicken breast or the chicken onto their plate. And then an apprentice would come out with the vegetables and potatoes, and those veggies and potatoes will be spoon and fork served onto the plates of the individual customers. But in the 1970s, and I'm talking about the middle 1970s, Jean and Pierre Turgot, they decided that no more they were going to do silver service, they were going to do plate service. So modern day plate service came from that point. They decided that they were going to make their dishes into pictures, and those pictures were going to be served to the restaurant, to the people in the restaurant. So that's when the pass was developed in a much more difficult way, or different way. If you think about Hell's Kitchen and Gordon Ramsay, you'll always see Gordon Ramsay on the pass, and everything will go to him and it will be plated there and then served to the customers, or to the restaurant staff to be served to the customers. So Jean and Pierre Turgot, they were very influential in the plate service that happens now. You never see anything anymore served on a silver platter, and it's thanks to these guys. So what is this nouvelle cuisine that we're talking about? It's a culinary philosophy based on the rejection of overly rich and complicated dishes. It's about healthful eating a little bit more. There was a lot of butter and a lot of cream still in there, but it was a much more healthier, lighter way of being able to produce these classical dishes. The ingredients had to be 100% fresh, of the highest possible quality. Talking again about the beauty of allowing the freshness and the perfection of the ingredients to talk to the customer, to talk to the dish, if you like. You don't really have to do much with the perfect ingredient. You let it speak for itself. The cooking method should be really simple and direct, so it wasn't overcooked. It wasn't something that you wouldn't get well done steaks and stuff like that. Everything would be lighter and much more simple and much more direct. Complicated plates must be elegantly designed and decorated. I've said that before. The Trogros, they wanted to do these beautiful fanned out duck breasts on a plate to make it look like a flower. So it was pictures on a plate. That's basically what Nouvelle Cuisine was. And the next stage of development, we get regional and slow food. Regional cuisine emphasizes local, seasonal products, pioneered in Canada by Marcel Kretz, and in the United States, very famous lady Alice Waters in her restaurant in San Francisco. Yeah, the idea was that, you know, you wouldn't have a menu or a dish with strawberries on it in December when there are no strawberries around. So everything was seasonal, everything was local. Slow food, on the other hand, uses local ingredients, promotes an awareness of good food and good nutrition as well, but it's ecologically balanced. It's sustaining the ecological balance of the world. So that's the difference between regional and slow food. So next we're going to look at fusion cuisine. North American cuisine has always been influenced by cuisines from other countries, because remember, only the indigenous people are actually native to Canada and to America. Everyone else pretty much is an immigrant from that point. So all of these things were coming together. You would have classical cuisine, you would have Nouvelle cuisine, you would have Asian cuisine, all of those type of things would all be coming in. Really around about the mid-80s it started. I remember in the middle 90s in Toronto, Asian fusion was very much pioneered by a chef called Susur Lee. I'm sure quite a lot of you have heard of Susur Lee. Not originally from Toronto, obviously, but his restaurants were in Toronto. One of the most expensive meals I've ever had was in Susur when he had that restaurant in Toronto. It was an incredible meal. It was one of the best meals of my life. Again, he takes his Asian influence, all the things he knows about his native cuisine, and brings it all in together and fuses it together into something that's really different. So a pretty genius chef there, and basically that is fusion cuisine. So the last part we're going to look at today is the farm to table movement. So basically think Bistro 67. Chefs look to incorporate all these different global flavors and ingredients, but they're also looking for locally grown things. Now we grow things right on the campus in Durham College. Farm to table movement supports local growers and reduces on reliance from imports, so things that it's not a big footprint, it's not coming all the way from Italy or whatever, you're growing it on your doorstep. The focus is on foods that are served in season. It protects all these heirloom varieties, all these beautiful varieties of tomatoes and apples and things that we have. Many farmers offer organic and chemical-free product. We've got that all in Bistro 67. And I love the idea that we can grow apples on campus, and you guys can go out and help to pick these apples. You can talk to Bob, who grew the apple, and then you can go up to Bistro 67 or into one of the labs, and you can make an apple pie, and you can go to the customer and say, this is an apple pie that I made. Bob grew the apples, and I helped Bob pick those apples today. I mean, how amazing is that, that you know exactly where that apple came from that's in your apple pie. So that, in a nutshell, is the farm to table movement. And now we're going to be moving on to some other sort of significant things to do with this course or class today. So now we're going to look at food service operations, particularly in the back of house. So the organisation of the kitchen is all that we're going to be dealing with today and in this class. But it's a system of staffing a kitchen so that each worker is designed a specific set of tasks. So as I said before, if it's a veal escalope, the garde-manger will do one part of it, the saucier will do another part of it, the entremets will do another part of it. And you notice that I'm using these French words, but we're going to be dealing with those going forward, and you're going to have to know the French for each position in the kitchen. Escoffier, by the way, is accredited with developing this hierarchical kitchen or system in the kitchen, come from modern and classical cuisine, and develop forward from there. So we're going to look in detail about each position that's in a classical kitchen. So before we go into detail and break down and talk about the classical kitchen brigade, I want you just to look on the top right hand corner of this slide and you'll see a red star. That is my method for telling you that this is a very, very important slide. All of the slides in my PowerPoint that have a red star are the ones that you need to learn. Basically, that means that you're going 100% to be asked a question about this slide in the future in one of your tests or one of your quizzes. Maybe your final exam, maybe your midterm, maybe just a quiz. So yeah, make sure that you, if it's the only thing that you learn, if you pay no attention to the rest of this PowerPoint, please make sure that you memorize the information on all of the slides that have a red star. Okay, so moving forward to the classical kitchen brigade. This is just an overall view right now. We're going to look at each position that is important in detail. Some of the things we're not really worried about, and some of the positions will be missed out. We're not going to talk about them in much detail, so I'll go over them very quickly on this slide. So obviously you have chef de cuisine, head chef, the guy who's running the kitchen and in charge of the kitchen. The buck stops there, if you like. Then you have sous chef. He may also be the expediter, or the aboyer, if you like, to use a French term. I grew up in French kitchens, so I have to use these terms. He's the guy who works the pass sometimes. You may have more than one sous chef. Basically, in English, sous chef means second chef, the second chef in charge. And then after that, you have chef de parties, or station chefs. We're going to look at this in more detail in a minute, but you'll see that there's quite a lot listed here. Some of them are important to what we need to learn. Some of them we can let fall by the wayside. Saucier, sauce chef, we need to know about him, so we'll be talking about him later on. The grillardin, we may talk about him a little bit, but he's not that important. He's the guy really who works the grill, so all the steaks that come in, all the grilled chicken breasts, etc., the grillardin will work the grill to deal with all of those things. Rôtisseur, the roast cook, he's very important. We will be talking about him in detail. Légumier, you won't be talking about him very much. We'll just miss him out completely right now. The garde-manger, or the pastry chef, or the pantry chef, or the larder chef as he's called in Europe. We're going to be talking about him in detail. Pâtissier, the pastry chef, we're going to be talking about him in detail. The poissonnier, not the poisoner, the poissonnier, the fish cook, we're going to talk about him in a lot more detail. Please don't get that O and I mixed up so that you call him the poisoner. It's a very common mistake, and it doesn't sound good, right? The friturier, that's the guy who, this deep fat fryer. We're not going to be talking about him in any detail. You just need to know that he deep fries stuff. The potager, he's a soup cook. Most kitchens nowadays don't have a potager. I was lucky enough when I did my apprenticeship, I was apprenticed to a potager. We actually had a soup cook, and all he dealt with was soups for all the different banquets and different restaurants in the hotel. The entremetier, we're going to be talking about him in great detail. The vegetable cook, very, very important to us. The chef tournon, we'll talk about him. He has really got an interesting job. The chef tournon, in English, or in American if you like, or Canadian American, whatever, is called the swing cook. So basically he's a really skilled chef, because when somebody drops dead on the sauce corner, the chef de partie, the saucier, drops dead, the chef tournon can go in and do his job. It might be that one of the guys is off, one of the chef de parties is off, the chef tournon will cover his shift or cover his holidays if he's away on vacation for a while. So very, very skilled chef. And then we have apprentices and commis and stagiaires, and we're going to look at them in a wee bit more detail later on. So in a nutshell, that is basically the classic kitchen brigade. Yeah, and this is another slide with one of those famous red stars on it. This is the overall of La Brigade de Cuisine, which is basically the cuisine brigade, the brigade of the kitchen, if you like. This is what I'm looking for in any tests or quizzes. So this is the way that I want it to be formatted. You won't necessarily have to write the whole thing out, but you have to know a little bit of this hierarchy going forward. I don't know where hierarchy came from, but never mind. Anyway, so the first thing that we have, or the first person that we have, the guy in charge, is the executive chef. Again, we're going to go through these things in a wee bit more detail in a second or two, but I really get irritated when I see things like Hell's Kitchen and everybody on there is an executive chef. Even although there's only one other person in the kitchen, it just basically means they're running it and suddenly they're an executive chef. So I've done this for a long time, and in all honesty, I've only really had two real executive chef positions. My last position was a proper executive chef, and a proper executive chef doesn't really work in the kitchen. He's the guy who writes the menus, does all the admin and everything else. Technically speaking, he's an executive. He doesn't work on the line with the rest of the people. That's usually the way that it works. So there is a difference between a chef de cuisine and an executive chef. Chef de cuisine is the chef who's in charge of the kitchen. He will be one step lower, usually, than the executive chef if you have a classical brigade. Chef de cuisine is the guy that's in charge of the kitchen again. He may be executive chef stroke chef de cuisine. It doesn't really matter, but whichever way, he's the next guy in charge. And then after that, you have sous chefs, which are the second chefs, or the second chef. And you might have 10 sous chefs. It depends on how big the place is. When I was an apprentice, I think we had 8 sous chefs. But there was one senior sous chef, or one executive sous chef, if you like, who would be in charge of all the sous chefs. So depending on how big the place is, the more positions that you have, if you like. Chef de partie, these are the chef de parties that we're going to be dealing with. These are the chef de parties that you need to know. And if you look here, you'll see that the French is written on top, and underneath the English equivalent of that, or the English translation, if you like. So we have saucier, which is a sauce cook. We have rôtisseur, which is the roast cook. We have poissonnier, remember, not the poisoner, who is the fish cook. You have the entremetier, who's the vegetable cook. You have the garde-manger, who's the pantry or the larder cook. You have the pâtissier, who's the pastry cook. And you have the chef tournon, who's the swing cook, the guy who goes all the way around and is a senior chef de partie for sure, one of the more skilled chef de parties. And by the way that it works, the saucier is normally the senior chef de partie. So when promotions happen in the kitchen, usually it's the saucier who becomes a sous chef when a sous chef leaves or a sous chef is promoted. But the saucier is usually the senior chef de partie. And then going down from there, you have commis, who are chefs who are training. They're not normally apprenticed. When you're apprenticed, you are indentured. It means you're signing papers and you're working your way through an actual apprenticeship. And a stagiaire is an intern. Basically, stagiaires work for nothing. And you can be any age to be a stagiaire. I have staged with Marc Lépine. I've staged in quite a few different places. Basically, you're just going there to work for nothing and to learn. We'll go into some of these things in a little bit more detail. But remember, this is a red star slide, and it's what I want in any tests or quizzes. It's also, by the way, in case you can't read this properly because it's formatted slightly differently than some of the other slides, this is also posted on DC Connect under content. I think that finishes this slide. So first of all, chef, basically it means chief. Chef de l'école means chef of the school, right? You basically have three different levels of chef when you get to the senior positions. You'll have an executive chef. I talked about him in the last slide, where he's basically the executive. He does everything executively. He doesn't work on the line. The chef de cuisine probably won't work on the line either, but he may be a chef de cuisine. He may be a working chef de cuisine or a working head chef, because chef de cuisine means head chef, right? So he may be a working head chef. It means that he may have to work on the line or have to work on banquets or one of those type of things. It really just depends on the size of the kitchen. But please remember, executive chef is really the executive guy who doesn't work in the kitchen. Chef de cuisine, or the head chef, they may be working head chefs or working chef de cuisines. They may have to work in the kitchen. And next we come to the sous chef, or the second chef. He's directly in charge of production. Make no bones about it, by the way, guys, the sous chef is probably the most important, it was definitely, in fact, in my opinion, the most important chef that's in the kitchen. If I'm an executive chef or a chef de cuisine and I want something done, my sous chef, I just say, okay, get that done, and he goes away. If he needs to fire somebody, he needs to discipline somebody, the sous chef goes away and does all of that sort of stuff. Executive chef or chef de cuisine will be the guy who writes the menus, comes up with all these brilliant ideas. Hopefully he brings his team in to develop those ideas, but the sous chef is the guy who will go to all the chef de parties, etc., and get these things carried out. He will be the guy who arranges things and makes sure that it works. He's the guy who is responsible for the day-to-day running of the kitchen, because the executive chef is spending his time in the office, basically. The sous chef, I will tell you a little bit about the best sous chef I ever had. The last position that I had as executive chef, I had an amazing team, the best team that I've ever had in my working life. It took me almost 2 years to build them up and to get together. For the time that we were together, we were incredibly efficient, and it was a great team. My sous chef was a guy called Nick. He came to me when I was looking for a sous chef. I was advertising for a sous chef, and I had guys that had finished. This was in Ottawa, and I had guys who had just finished a 2-year course in college coming in applying for a sous chef's position, and obviously not enough experience and not who I was looking for. And Nicky came to me. He had actually been an executive chef for the Ottawa Senators, actually, in one of the big, what was it called, Scotiabank Place or whatever. And he realized that he'd been promoted beyond the skills that he had. He didn't want to be an executive chef anymore. He couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle the hours. He didn't want to work all those hours anymore. He used to tell me that he would go home at night time with his feet pretty much bleeding after doing a 16-hour day. And he said, I don't want to be that anymore, but I want to be the best sous chef that there ever was. And believe me, he was incredible. He was the best sous chef, 100% had my back in everything. So sous chef is 100% the most important guy in the kitchen. If you're going to hire a sous chef, take your time, hire the best guy that you can get, because he's going to cover your butt every single day of your life. So the station chefs, these are the French chef de parties, or the word that we use in France is chef de parties, chef de partie, in charge of a corner, a specific area of the kitchen. In North America, we call them station chefs. I've touched on a couple of them a little bit over the last couple of slides, but we're going to go into the most frequently found station chefs and the most important ones. We're going to go into them in a little bit more detail, each one step by step. Another red star, of course, for the saucier, or the sauce chef, who prepares saucy stews, stocks, hot hors d'oeuvres sometimes, sautés food to order. He's normally the highest position of all the station chefs, or of all the chef de parties. most important guy, the guy who's probably going to be promoted next to a sous chef. Really, that's all we need to worry about when we're talking about the saucier or the sauce chef. Next, we're going to talk about the fish cook or the poissonnier or the poissonnier. Please remember to spell this properly. Don't drop one of those S's. Don't drop the last I, or you end up with a poisoner, and it really doesn't sound good. And I will take marks off for that for sure. So please make sure that you spell this right. Fish cook, poissonnier. Obviously prefers all the fish dishes. In a smaller kitchen, it might be covered by the saucier. It just depends. Remember, all of these things are from the classical hierarchy of the kitchen, and the smaller kitchens become, because they're more and more expensive to have staff these days, the more jobs that the one chef de partie will do. So a saucier might be the poissonnier, he might even be the entremetier as well. It really just depends. And sometimes we just dump them down to titles like line cook. But in a classical kitchen, the fish cook is a poissonnier. And next we come to the vegetable cook or the entremetier. He prefers vegetables and starches and grains and soups and eggs, egg dishes, all of those type of things. In a very large kitchen, he might not do all of these things just the same as in a smaller kitchen. He might do even more of these things. He might just be basically a line cook. But the vegetable cook, the fry cook and the soup cook, or the potager, they can all be separate people. The fry cook is the friturier, remember. The soup cook is the potager. The vegetable cook is the entremetier. But really, we're only interested in the entremetier or the vegetable cook. And in a classical kitchen, he will prepare vegetables, starches and grains, maybe soups, and maybe egg dishes as well. Entremetier, vegetable cook. Next we come to the roast cook or the rôtisseur. He prepares, obviously, all the roasted and braised meats and the gravies and things like that, grilled meats, items to order. You might have a grillardin who is part of the rôtisseur corner or the roast corner, who does all the grills. He might just be called a broiler cook. He might prepare deep fried things. It really just depends on the size of the kitchen. But in a classical kitchen, the roast cook is a rôtisseur, and he deals with roasted game, roasted chickens, roasted beef, ribs of beef for buffets, all of that sort of stuff. The rôtisseur, roast cook. Then we have the pantry chef or the garde-manger. You've probably heard of the garde-manger. He's quite an important guy in the kitchen. Again, probably fairly senior in the ranks of chef de parties for sure. He prefers cold food, prefers salads and dressings and pâtés and cold hors d'oeuvres and buffet platters and even sandwiches sometimes. Depending on the size of the kitchen again. When I was an apprentice, the garde-manger dealt with cold foods, things like that. But he had people who were in his section who just made salads. We had an hors d'oeuvrier who just made cold hors d'oeuvres and hot hors d'oeuvres. We even had these ladies who were called sandwich maids. Very political incorrect, I guess now. But they just dealt with sandwiches for all the banquets and buffets and things that we had. Basically all day they made sandwich fillings and they made sandwiches. The chef de partie of the garde-manger when I was an apprentice was a Swiss gentleman. His name was Peter Morosi. He was absolutely insane, but probably the most creative person that I've ever seen in a kitchen for sure when it came to buffet work and things like that. He was so insane that his nickname was Dozy Morosi. But I've seen him doing artwork on cold hams. It's a dying thing now, but we used to have chauffoid. If you Google chauffoid, you'll see that it was a ham which was trimmed down and covered with basically bechamel set with aspic jelly so that it set and you coated the sauce right over the ham. And then we used to use truffle and stuff like that. And they would cut thin things and do pictures on on them. And I remember one of the things that he did. I used to have the drawing actually. He did Leonardo da Vinci's praying hands on the top of a decorated ham, and it was absolutely brilliant. So he was very, very eccentric, very, very strange man indeed, but a creative genius for sure. The pantry chef or the garde-manger. Then we have the pastry chef or the pâtissier. Obviously prepares pastries and desserts, works with chocolate, works with sugar, sometimes does baked goods. It really just depends. Most of the time he probably will nowadays. When I was an apprentice, we had a baker and we had a pastry chef. Very, very influential person. For me, I trained under a German pastry chef. His name was Peter Hauser. And he was very influential on getting me involved in being a pastry chef. When I finished my apprenticeship, I went back to the beginning again and became a commie in the pastry and did my apprenticeship in the pastry and learned quite amazing things. I love being a pastry chef. I love working with chocolate. I love working with sugar. A couple of semesters ago for Durham College, I made a sugar violin, out of sugar. Chef Tanya is the pastry chef, and I work with her quite a lot, and she does some amazing stuff. She's a very skilled lady as well. So pastry chef, pâtissier, very important chef de partie in the kitchen. Pâtissier, pastry chef. Next we have the relief cook or the swing cook, in French the chef tournant. We talked about him earlier on. He basically replaces all the other station chefs in their absence. So if the saucier is on vacation for 2 weeks, the tournant or the swing cook or the relief cook, whatever you want to call him, he will be the guy who goes in and runs that section or that party for the time when the sous chef, when the saucier or whoever it is on vacation. Must have a really high skill level, obviously. He's been trained in all of the kitchens, or all of the sections of the kitchen, I should say. He is a high level chef. He's very skilled. He may be the next person to be promoted to be a sous chef, even although the saucier is normally the person, or the senior chef de partie. Sometimes the chef tournant is an older guy who doesn't want to do things anymore, or doesn't want to be in that competitive field anymore, and just wants to cover things off and have a job where he can do something different every day, or every few weeks at least, anyway. Very important person in the kitchen, the relief cook, the swing cook sometimes he's called, or the chef tournant in French. Next we come to cooks and assistants. They will normally be commies. A commie is usually just somebody who's working in the kitchen. An apprentice is somebody who's indentured, I've said that already, who's actually signing papers and working through their apprenticeship under the chef de cuisine. You also have stagiaires, and stagiaires basically work for nothing. They're interns, they work for knowledge. And again, it's a really good way of learning. It might not be everybody's cup of tea, but if you want to learn a specific thing, and you have 2 weeks vacation, which I used to do all the time when I was in hotels and restaurants, I would take 2 weeks vacation. I would call up somebody that I wanted to work with. I would say I would like to come as a stagiaire. Can I work there for 2 weeks just for knowledge? And most times you would be able to get in and work for knowledge. To get into a restaurant like El Bulli, very famous, or Alinea in Chicago, very difficult to get in. You've got guys waiting for a good couple of years to be able to come as stagiaires there. But anyway, the cooks and assistants. Commie is usually someone who's just working in the kitchen and learning, not indentured as an apprentice. An apprentice is obviously indentured, serving papers, serving his apprenticeship. and a stagiaire is someone who's an intern and basically works for nothing. Modern kitchen brigade in a pretty decent place, a pretty decent hotel, would probably consist of an executive chef, a sous chef, maybe some line cooks or line cooks, a pastry chef, although pastry chef jobs are fairly hard to come by nowadays because lots of people try and save the money by buying all of their pastries and desserts in. But a decent place will have a pastry chef. You will have apprentices after that, and you will have short order cooks doing just general sort of a work on the line. This is a fairly okay example of a modern kitchen brigade. So now we're going to look at the role of the chef or the kitchen manager. Some of the things that are some of the jobs that they have to do, some of the things that they're going to be dealing with on a day-to-day basis. We're going to look at some of the positive things about being a chef or a kitchen manager, and we're going to look at some of the negative things about being a chef or a kitchen manager. I would normally throw this out to the class, but we'll just talk our way through. I'll just do all the talking. Anyway, some of the roles, I think we mentioned this in a previous slide. I'm not sure if I'm imagining that or not, but some of the roles of a chef or a kitchen manager are things like purchasing, so buying, budgeting, menu creation, recipe creation, the standards of the dishes that are going out so that they all look the same, the cooking of those dishes, the recipe development and making sure that they're done properly, the people management, so managing the staff, the scheduling, conflicts between staff, injuries. We're going to be looking as the role of the kitchen manager and chef to be dealing with all of those things. So let's look at some of the positive and some of the negative aspects of these jobs. So we're going to drop the title, if you like, of kitchen manager, and we're going to really concentrate on just saying chef from now on. But here's some of the positives of being a chef in a kitchen. Obviously, you have a higher salary. Note it's going to be a salary. It's not an hourly paid position. Basically that means that whether you work 1 hour a week or 20 hours a week, you're going to be paid the same thing. So you will have a higher salary, one of the main advantages. You will have creative freedom. So you'll have the freedom to be able to create menus, to be able to decide how things are looking, how dishes are going to be plated, all of those sort of things. So you've got creative freedom for sure. You will maybe at this point you've achieved some of your career goals, or you're beginning to be on the lower level of being a chef, and you're going to move on to be able to achieve some more of the goals that you have within your career. You have complete control of the kitchen, which is really a good thing. You're also responsible for the success of the kitchen. So all of that responsibility lies on your shoulders. But being a chef is a great job, and all of these things are positives within that job. So some of the negatives of being a chef, it's very high risk. It's very high risk for having a heart attack or whatever, for sure. Lot of responsibility, lot of very stressful, lots of long hours. Yeah, you can normally work anything from 12 to 14 hours a day. You'd be surprised how many hours that you work with. You're going to have to be dealing with the staff, both front and back of house. Probably you're going to be dealing with customers as well. Any customer complaints and things, it's a good thing for the chef to go out and actually talk to the customer who's complaining. You are going to be responsible for the failures in the kitchen as well, so maybe that's a little bit of a negative in there. requires a lot of capital. So that's where the high risk thing comes in. Whether you're going to run your own restaurant and being the chef of your own restaurant, or whether you're going to work for someone, it's a high risk job because it costs a lot of money to have a head chef, and it's one of the kitchens, or it's one of the positions that can go fairly quickly because the restaurant owner can't afford to have a high-paid chef in that position. So one of the, or a couple of the negatives in there. It just depends on how you look at life, right? But the way that I see it, these are not really negatives. There's a couple of wee bits in there that are not the best part of your life, but in a day-to-day process, all those positives come in, or a day-to-day running of the kitchen, all of those positives come in there, and it's an awesome job when you get it, that's for sure. Now we're going to look at the qualities of a professional and work ethic. And by the way, work ethic, there's a Word document posted on DC Connect. My take on work ethic, I usually have it as a little rant on the first class. And you might not agree with all the points because different people look at things from a different perspective. But if you want to go on and you want to go through the ranks relatively quickly, then my little rant on work ethic will help you to be able to do that. Some of the things that you need professionally, or the qualities of a professional chef, are that you need to have a positive attitude towards the job. There is no point of getting up in the morning feeling really negative, going to work, taking that negativity in with you, infecting everybody that you work with that negative attitude. If that's what it is, it's time to leave your job and get out. You will have to have staying power. Because sometimes you're going to be working a lot of long hours, and you need to be able to be strong and be healthy and have that mental attitude to be able to do that. You will need to have the ability to work with others. Sometimes when somebody comes in with a negative attitude, you're going to have to pick them up and get everybody positive. You will have to have eagerness. I apologize about that, but you will have to have eagerness to learn. That is the thing that keeps me going from day to day. Even now, all the time, I'm learning every single day, and I try to make sure that I learn something every single day, that I'm going and learning what the new things that are coming out, a new skill, a new interest, everything like that. But eagerness to learn is really important professional quality. Full range of skills, you've got to develop your full range of skills, but if you're just working on one specific section, you want to learn everything there is to know. You want to learn from the people that are senior to you. You want to get their information, because every single thing that's out there, you have to get that information from somebody, right? If you're working with someone, you want to know everything that they know. You're going to be gaining experience. You want to have dedication to quality. You want to have a good understanding of the basics. You need to know how roux work, why when I'm making a specific baked item do I put baking powder and baking soda in, because they both work differently, and I want to make sure that my thing is going to rise or whatever. So there's a lot of things to learn, but these are some of the qualities of a professional within the kitchen for sure. So for the final few slides, we're going to look a little bit into why we're doing this Principles of Kitchen Management course. What is the point behind all of this? Maybe not now. It might not be important to you right now, but if you decide to have your own restaurant, or are lucky enough to open your own restaurant, you will need to remember some of these things that we're going to learn in this Principles of Kitchen Management course, because the average failure rate for a restaurant in its first year is about 23%. One in four. One in four new restaurants close because the people don't know the principles of kitchen management that you're going to learn over the next few weeks. And it's just mostly through ignorance that this happens. Not always. Things can happen. COVID can happen, and suddenly you lose your restaurant because you can't pay your rent anymore or whatever. But please remember, the average failure rate for a restaurant is 1 in 4, or 23%. And if you remember some of these principles of kitchen management that you're going to learn, you'll be a good kitchen manager. You'll be able to have a successful business. So we just talked about the average failure rate for a restaurant in the first year, 23%. The average failure rate for a restaurant after 3 years is 60%, or 3 in 5. And again, it's down to these principles of kitchen management that we're going to learn. And once you know these things, you can go forward and run a very successful restaurant and a very profitable restaurant because you've learned these basic skills. And here in a nutshell is the very reason why we're doing principles of kitchen management. Why do you do it? It's high risk, for sure it's high risk, but there's a lot of high rewards. If you have a successful restaurant, there is nothing to beat that in the world. It's brilliant. But why do restaurants fail? Again, as we talked about in the last couple of slides, right down to one thing: not understanding the business, not understanding the principles of kitchen management. And how are you going to be successful in your restaurant? How is your restaurant going to stand out from the rest? Why is it not going to close down? Just boils down to one thing: numbers. Well, not really one thing, but numbers. The conversions that we're going to be learning over the next few weeks are important. How do you convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit and back? How, if you have a restaurant that, for whatever reason, I hate cups, but why are they in cups? How am I going to convert that into grams? Whatever else, you need to know about those sort of things. You need to know about purchasing. How do I buy? What's the right thing to buy? How do I control that stuff? How do I receive the stuff that I'm buying? How do I make sure that it doesn't go bad before I can use it? Recipe standards. How can I make sure that all of the dishes in my restaurant are going to go out exactly the same every single time? Think about McDonald's. It doesn't matter what McDonald's restaurant you go to, pretty much you've got recipe standards. You're going to get a Big Mac the same here as you will in Halifax, as you will in Vancouver. The recipe standards are really important. And cost control. Because remember this one thing: it doesn't matter who it is, somebody is going to try and rip you off. If you don't control the way that things are delivered into your restaurant, the people who are delivering that thing or those ingredients into your restaurant are going to rip you off. So you imagine if you order 10 cases of eggs and you don't check them off and you only accept 8, and on the invoice it says 10 cases, the next time that person who's delivering those eggs is going to give you 8 and hope that you're not going to notice that there's 2 missing. So cost control, receiving, purchasing, all those conversions, recipe standards, standardized recipes so that they're cooked the same every single time. We're going to be looking at all of those things over the next few weeks. So basically we've come to the end of the first online Principles of Kitchen Management lesson. Next week we're going to be looking at human resources and the Employment Standards Act. But there's a lot of good information in this. Some of the things I said before are posted on DC Connect so that you can go over them, you can read them for yourself. This movie link is posted on DC Connect so that you can go over it time and time again. It's basically just like sitting in class listening to me rabbiting on. But I hope that you've learned something out of it. We're going to talk next week at the beginning, or not next week actually, it's going to be Thursday. We're going to talk on Thursday about feedback and how you felt this class went. So you can either sit on a virtual classroom and listen to me talking about all of this stuff, or you can take it away with you and you can look at it at your own leisure and go over it time and time again and have the same class as many times as you want. So I think it's a pretty good way of learning. So we'll talk about that on Thursday. You're going to give me your feedback when we go into virtual classroom, You're going to tell me what you thought about the way that I presented the class. I know that I talk in my own way. I'm not going to make any difference from that. I don't want to talk in a proper way or a proper formatted way. I'm just going to be me, and I'm just going to talk to you the same way as I would talk to you if we were face-to-face in a class. Anyway, to sum up, there's a good few things to look at for this week. Please make sure that you learn particularly the slides with the red stars on them, because you will 100% be asked questions on those at some point over the course. And remember that next week we're going to talk about human resources and the Employment Standards Act, because we have to understand how human resources departments, etc., function and why they came into being. We need to know about the Employment Standards Act to know what our rights are as employees. When you're called into work, for instance, for a meeting, you need to be paid 3 hours for that. That is the law. If you're sent back away after an hour, then you need to be paid for 3 hours. So there's a lot of different things. How many stat holidays are there in Ontario over the year? The answer is 9, but you will find that out next week or on Thursday. I keep saying next week, but I really mean Thursday. Anyway, little bit of feedback when we get back into class again. I wish you well over the next week. Please make sure that you go over this stuff. Have an awesome week. That's it.